tua mamma.
No. 3 tuổi hả?
2 tuổi, 3 tuổi thôi.
Nếu mà Tâm Phúc Sa lớn hơn em còn không?
Còn.
Bon, numéro 1. Ce sont les questions que vous pouvez poser.
Kamu mau makan apa? Saya mau makan hamburger dan chips. Kamu mau apa?
Buongiorno bambine.
My name is I'm Dr. Haji. How can I?
Sportiet vom velikovo turskovo hudожника.
Più fresca, più pronta migliore, più fresco, piace agli italiani molto.
申し訳ございませんが。
The children in this class range from 5 years to 9 years and come from about 5 different countries with varied educational backgrounds. They have all been in Australia less than 6 months, and so they are all learning English for the first time.
I'm so hungry, so hungry.
They've been a difficult class to get to work in a group together, but I think we're getting there. And I really have enjoyed them. They're good fun to work with.
I'm so hungry!
Tut. What's this?
T.
T starts with T, yes.
Two.
Two starts with T.
Television.
Television starts with T. That's a good one, yes.
Collingwood English Language School is an intensive English language school. The purpose of the school is to prepare students for mainstream schooling. So while they are here, we're teaching them the English that they need, both to survive in the community, but also covering the broad range of subject areas, really teaching them the language, the English language that they need for all of those subject areas.
I'm going to tell you to do some things. You listen and do them. Don't look at other people's work and don't tell other people what to do. Okay, the first one. This is going to be a house. Okay, so first draw a roof on your house. Draw a roof. The activity where the children were drawing a house, there were 3 different kinds of instructions I was giving the children. I was asking them to draw, I was asking them to colour, I was asking them to cut and stick as well. Then I was asking them to write something, write the name of their picture. So those instructions, I wanted to see if they could do those things. And the second thing was really to see if they'd learnt the vocabulary that we had been using, just the words, the names, roof, window, door, fence, gate, things like that. And I do a lot of activities like that. You're assessing all the time, if they know their colours, if they can just follow simple instructions. Maybe just something simple like saying good morning to me in the morning, just answering a question about some work we've done. This is assessment.
It's an ongoing process. Teachers are constantly monitoring students' progress and they keep records in different ways. You have anecdotal records, you have reading profiles. We have assessment activities at least twice a term. Those are formal assessment activities, but it's really just part of the whole picture that you're building up. It's part of an ongoing monitoring of students' progress, really on a daily basis.
What do you think is good in the house? What do you think is good?
Well, it seems to me that teachers use assessment as a means, first of all, of giving feedback to learners on how well they are doing, and on getting feedback for themselves as teachers to see how they're doing, if you like, to see how far the learners are progressing in relation to what it is they're supposed to be learning. They see assessment as having this function of improving the learning process. So for that reason, a lot of teacher assessment tends to be of the less formal kind, insofar as it might take the form of a test, for example, a brief test that they might prepare from time to time, and say on a weekly basis or at the end of a unit. In its most informal form, if you like, it could take the form of just feedback, verbal feedback to learners on some aspect of their performance that they need to take notice of.
The stove and the kitchen table. Oh, that's excellent. Now it says here, write the names. Now here are some words here. Twice a term, I choose some activities out of the work program I have prepared to use as assessment activities. These activities to the children would seem part of the normal classroom activities. All children would do the same activity, though of course I'm not expecting the same level of achievement from all children. They're only formal in the sense that I choose an activity to be the vehicle for my assessment. If it's a written activity, I keep the sheets. I don't give them back to the children. Normally their work would go in their book, but I would keep those and I'll use them for reference later. Where's Wanting in the picture? And what are you doing? Often when I do an assessment activity at the end of a unit, I find out things about the students that I didn't realise, especially if I have a one-to-one situation and ask some questions by themselves. Right, Min, I'm going to ask you some questions about the house. Can you show me the bedroom in the house?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there another bedroom in the house?
Yes.
You find that the child hasn't really understood these things or can't use the language that you have hoped they would be able to use. I record this and I try and extend that child in the next theme and usually often do the same language again, and the child generally improves. What's she doing now? Will she stand up? What's she
Cooking dinner.
She's cooking dinner. What do you think she might be?
Formative and summative were originally terms that were applied to evaluation by Michael Scriven. And formative evaluation referred to the kinds of evaluation that were carried out during the course of a program in order to improve the program, whereas summative evaluation took place at the end of the program primarily for accountability purposes.
Where is the piano? In the
Living room.
good?
In terms of assessment, the same distinction can more or less apply, that formative assessment is that kind of assessment that takes place at various points throughout the program, for example, at the end of a unit of learning, at the end of a week's work, whereas summative assessment is that which looks back over the entire program and samples the student's achievement across the range of objectives that might have been covered throughout all of that program.
Now you hide Fred's trumpet somewhere.
Finish.
Okay, just come around here so I can see you. Okay, now I'm going to, you say to me, what are you going to say to me?
Where Fred trumpet?
Ah, okay. Is it in the kitchen?
No.
Ah, is it in the bedroom?
No.
Is it in the living room?
No.
Is it in the bathroom?
Yeah.
Ah.
All of our assessment really is formative, because what you are doing, you are using your assessment to inform your teaching program. And it can really only be said to be summative at the point at which you are making a summative statement about what students can and cannot do for the purposes of reporting. Now, that's both reporting to parents and also reporting to schools when they actually exit the program.
Now, I keep these records, the running records of things that happen in the classroom and the more formal assessment activities records in a folder with the children's work, with samples of the children's work. And when it's time to report to parents or to report to the feeder schools that the children will go to when they leave, well, then I use these to write reports. The report we give to parents has to be translated into 12 or 14 different languages. So it's quite a simple report, and it tells about the children's progress in listening, speaking, reading and writing, and also in maths, and their attitudes to schooling and their study skills as well. The report for feeder schools, of course, is just in English, and as well as showing a profile of the student's progress, we can also write extensive comments which will help the teacher when she gets this new child in the classroom.
Curriculum and assessment are inextricably intertwined. The they need to be. The purposes of assessment are really they're manyfold, but to evaluate the success of your teaching and for program planning purposes to see whether or not students are achieving the objectives that you set for them when you're teaching particular units or themes. So it's a constantly dynamic process.
So that would be the structure of it, but the actual words that you use are called a discourse. They're the ones, there are certain phrases that people would use if they're introducing something or introducing themselves or even finishing a talk. And that is, can you see point 3 there? Have you presented your work in the required discourse?
As a language faculty, we've decided that we will try to give girls work to do or tasks to do that will go into their reporting. And one of these categories is a recombination, and that students use language from different materials and bring it together. This is a summative assessment for the end of the term. They will take the language from the 3 discourses and from the painting and reproduce it in a new discourse, in another meaning. So they can either write a dialogue about it, or they can write an informative article, or they can pretend eventually that they're the tour guide who's taking people through the art gallery and they stop in front of this painting and they explain the meaning of the painting.
Godlivoj svahoj I nebogatovo.
Recombination is part of the Year 12 requirements, and now I use it in lower levels, even at Year 10, as you saw today. And the reason for that is because it prepares them for Year 12, but also I think it's a very valid task.
If you make something up, you're going to lose points?
Yeah.
Washback refers to the influence of assessment or testing on the curriculum. An incidence of positive washback would be when there is a close relationship between the assessment and what is being taught, so that the time spent in the classroom is time spent preparing the learners to use their proficiency in a way that will help them function in the future, in real life as it were, as well as to succeed in their assessments.
I think the days of just saying to a child, write an essay, has gone. We now need to give the children criteria so they know what they're being marked on. If they're good and have original ideas, they should get credit for those original ideas. If their grammar's poor, we should hone in on the things that they might need more work on. And criteria assessment works exceptionally well.
What did you think of the content? Do you think it was pretty relevant to what we had to do, the biography?
Content was pretty good. She's used a nage okroki. That was pretty good.
Well, what we were trying to do today, I think with those Year 10s, is something that we do from Year 8 upwards, really, when girls do a piece of writing for Writers' Workshop, we call it. We're trying to get them to focus on the criteria for that writing, to understand the criteria fully, and to look at themselves very critically and how they've met those criteria or not. One of the difficulties with it, I think, though, is that if we ask them really to do some self-assessment, they tend to be too critical of themselves, and if we ask them to assess their peers, they're perhaps over-generous at times.
I thought her organisation was really good because she had like a theme, so she was talking about his races, then she'd have a paragraph on races or whatever, so it was logically organised, I thought. It was very good.
So, Wendy, you haven't said much. You haven't made much comment on it. What do you think?
No, I just agree with everyone else. Yeah, the structure's really good and she's used a bit of like the past tense.
Well, peer assessment I would understand to be people giving feedback on their colleagues' work, but in relation to a set of specified criteria, which hopefully they would have developed collaboratively. I think it's valuable in sensitising people to the kinds of criteria that are being valued in a particular piece of work and what to look for. A lot of people get very worried if they find that peers, teachers and self-assessment ratings are divergent. But I don't think that's particularly surprising.
Madame?
Yeah, good. No, they're good comments. I'm just writing them down here and making my assessment.
It depends on what you think the aim of the exercise is. If you think it's like a test, then there's a problem. If you think that the main aim of it is to encourage people to develop their own criteria and to observe better the key features of particular kinds of tasks and the criteria that are used to judge them, then it's not a problem.
じゃあ皆さん、今はダニエルさんとイレーンさんのインタビューを聞きましょう。はい、どうぞ。
皆さん、おはようございます。今、日本の一番のラジオショーを聞いています。私はジェン・マスナグです。今日は外国人とインタビューをします。有名な人です。ホゼ君、おはようございます。お忙しいところすみませんが。
いえ、ジェンさん、おはようございます。
1回目に宇宙に行きましたか?
Each of us within the school has a very different style of teaching and will tend to prefer some criteria to others and see them as being more important.
僕はカットでした。
Within the Japanese department, we weight them so that usually you put very high, high, medium, low, very low. So what we do is we just put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is effectively exactly the same thing, except it's much easier to work out a grade at the end of the assessment period. The girls like having grades. They like to know whether they're an A, B or C, as well as knowing their mark. And the parents find it very important to know the actual marks rather than any descriptive assessment.
It
depends on the girl very much. People who are very responsible learners who want to do very well will take into account those descriptive comments. Girls who want to just quickly get through their schooling will just glance at the final mark and not really take into account the descriptive areas.
I think Danielle was very fluent and she was very expressive, and so was Jose. And it was interesting with language we could understand.
I had those very words, good expression, and especially when you showed sympathy with the death of a good friend from our textbook whom we all know. That was very well said. Any other comments, girls?
I really loved how often the girls will say to me, "Give us a test on vocabulary, madame. We need a test on vocabulary." And though I mightn't like them very much, I'll quite often do that because I can see that that's pushing them. We are also obliged at Year 10, for instance, to set a fairly formal exam, and we need to report on that using grades. So that although we prefer criterion referenced assessment for most of our work, at times we have to translate that into a graded system.
First, have a look at it together. I couldn't go into the living room to see my grandmother, and that's why I always remember the day she died. So we can turn it one more way. Well done.
AMES is the largest provider of specialist language and literacy education for adults in the state of Victoria. Its focus is primarily on adults of non-English speaking background. It's been in existence for a bit over 40 years. Most of that time has been as a sole provider of the Commonwealth Department of Immigration's Adult Migrant English program, but recently we've become a private provider of vocational education and training.
We are confused.
I'm confused. What's the confusion?
Because ever and never, just
The sentence I ever knew, it didn't know about the grandparents.
No, but I knew about one.
Why you write the new?
Because I knew only one.
For the first time for 40 years, in this particular program, our influences are coming more strongly from forces other than the ones that affected us in the 80s. The move to the competency-based curriculum has meant that assessment has become a major variable in teachers' work. It's something I've had to really think about.
How you actually ask for clarification of what you've said. I'm also going to be listening for how you ask opinions and how you give opinions to each other.
All right.
Hi, Boris.
Hi, Min.
Yeah. Did you watch last night news?
Yes, I watched night news.
Oh, I saw about Russia elections. This news very important on this time.
So really what's happened, I think, is that there's more formal assessment and that the demands or the characteristics of that assessment have come from other sources, but that the teacher's work is still essentially one of the selecting, grading, modifying and working through of tasks, as a series of tasks. And they did that in the past, and the difference now is that those tasks have to meet certain external criteria.
Remember New Life?
Oh.
Yes, I think there is a tension between external influences on testing and our internal needs. Typically we've got to conform with the assessment procedures imposed by the Board of Studies, the Victorian Board of Studies, and by the International Baccalaureate in this school. I think that industry has a different expectation of reporting again. So our biggest difficulty then, yes, is a tension between reporting and who we're reporting to and for what purposes, and the assessment tasks that we use, and then a tension between our teaching program and assessment.
In an ideal system, assessment, curriculum and reporting would be closely related. What would be taught would be what would be assessed. What would be assessed is what would be reported. However, that isn't necessarily always the case. In some cases, what happens is that people are asked to report outcomes against descriptions of behaviours that didn't necessarily figure in the curriculum.
I think that there's certainly more emphasis on assessment, but I don't necessarily think there's less emphasis on teaching. Like most things, it's not that when something new comes along, something else goes away. Assessing and teaching are both part of the same process. The difference is not that there's more assessment, but that there's more formal assessment. The assessment was always there, and in fact you could argue that a lot of what is called teaching is in fact assessing.
Assessment is overwhelmingly for the benefit of the teacher, that it's really what informs the teaching program. When you're measuring how well you've achieved the objectives that you've set out for that particular student, not for the whole class as a whole, but for that particular student, then you are measuring the effectiveness of your teaching, and that is going to help you with planning your program so that students can in fact achieve.
Every teacher would love to have more time to do the assessment program properly, to think more about the task, to think more about the way it's going to be assessed. In reality, that's very difficult in a teaching situation, but it has so much value that it is worth the time.
I think assessment can be great fun, in fact, and then I think it can be the most rewarding reinforcement for a student, and I really believe you'd always be able to just give some very positive feedback to students about where they're at with their language learning. It's terribly gratifying really rewarding for a teacher when you see students able to, and knowing perfectly well that they're able to perform very well on an assessment task and think to themselves, yes, I can do it.
He knew as the others, but before I was old, but he didn't know everything. He didn't know about the grandparents.
Hands up.